I'm Sienna Ziegler of EMC Research in Seattle, and I'll be walking through the results of the survey that we recently completed in Kenmore. But first, it's important to give you a little bit of context on why we did this survey. As part of the Love Where You Live project, we completed 2 citywide surveys of voters back in March and late last year with questions around affordable housing, parks, and other priorities for Kenmore. To complement this work and hear from a broader cross-section of residents beyond just those who are registered to vote in Kenmore and who tend to be easier to reach in voter surveys, we conducted an additional survey using an address-based sample methodology, meaning we contacted people based on mailing address. Because we tend to hear from a lot of homeowners and relatively higher income individuals in voter surveys, for this survey, we targeted a particular subset of downtown Kenmore with a higher proportion of renters and lower income households and mailed an invitation postcard to all residential households in this area. The survey asked a subset of the questions included in the 2 voter surveys, and then throughout this report, we'll compare the results from the 2 populations. One important caveat, though, because of the small sample size of the current survey, the projectability is limited and we don't want to assume that our respondents are representative of all residents of this part of downtown Kenmore, but it's still an informative supplement to what we heard in the voter surveys, which are representative of voters across the city. To conduct the survey, we mailed an invitation postcard in English and Spanish to every household within the defined area, which I'll show you in a moment here, with a link to take the survey online and a phone number for anyone who preferred to take the survey over the phone. We left the survey open for about a month and followed up the postcard with email and text reminders. You can see what the front side of the postcard looked like here on the right-hand side of the slide. And we wound up hearing from a total of 79 residents, so a pretty small sample size, but actually a bit better than we expected based on the number of households in the area. And then throughout the report, as I mentioned, we will make comparisons to the voter surveys that we conducted in March and last December. Both had about 300 respondents and were of voters citywide. And here's that map of the areas in downtown Kenmore that were included in the survey. As I noted, we mailed an invitation postcard to all residential mailing addresses in these areas and then followed up with text and email reminders to folks who we had additional contact information for. Before getting into the comparative results, a few key findings just from what we saw among downtown respondents. First, satisfaction with current city services is high. However, many are open to making some cuts to services to address the city's deficit in combination with tax increases. When it comes to parks and recreation in Kenmore, restoring habitats and providing more nature paths and trails are top priorities. And then looking at downtown amenities, more restaurants, gathering spaces, locally owned boutiques, and things like health and financial services are also important. Not surprisingly, in this area that has a high concentration of multifamily buildings and renters, affordable housing is a top concern, and there's support for allowing more diverse types of housing in Kenmore, such as duplexes and triplexes. And then finally, downtown respondents also showed support for more affordable housing in Kenmore for low-income and working-class families, as well as support for housing homeless families and individuals. As we did in both voter surveys, we began the current survey by asking respondents about the overall direction of Kenmore. In all 3 surveys, we see high optimism, with about 70% of voters saying things are going in the right direction, and then about 80% of downtown respondents, with only 18% of downtown respondents saying things are on the wrong track. Next, we asked an open-ended question about the most important issue for the City Council to focus on over the next 2 years. Respondents could say anything they wanted here, and we coded the responses into categories. We also show the responses as a word cloud on the bottom right, where the size of the word is proportional to how many times it was mentioned. Either way you look at it, responses around affordable housing and cost of living clearly rise to the top. And then when we looked just at respondents who don't live in a detached single-family home, which was 58 people or 73% of our sample, affordable housing jumped out even more, with almost 40% mentioning it, compared to about 30% of our respondents overall, but note that is an even smaller sample size. When we asked the same question in the fall 2023 survey among voters citywide, affordable housing also rose to the top, but to a lesser degree. Next, we asked respondents to rate their satisfaction with city services on a scale from 1 to 7, with 7 being extremely satisfied and 1 being not at all satisfied. On this slide, we're showing the downtown residents on the top and then the fall citywide voter survey numbers on the bottom. As you can see, there's a lot of similarity here, with a strong majority saying they're satisfied in both surveys and just a tad bit stronger satisfaction among downtown respondents. We also gave respondents some information about Kenmore's ongoing structural budget problem, explaining that property taxes, which are the largest share of the city's revenue, can only increase 1% per year, which is much lower than recent inflation, meaning the city can't maintain existing service levels and keep the budget balanced. We then gave respondents 3 options for how this could be addressed. In blue, you have maintaining services at their current level by allowing taxes to keep up with inflation. In green, using a combination of service cuts and tax increases, and then in red, cutting services while keeping taxes the same. Again, downtown respondents are the top bar, and you can see that while the green and red proportions are very similar between the 2 survey populations, a higher share of downtown residents, about a quarter as compared to 16% of voters citywide, favor maintaining services by allowing for larger tax increases. Next, we gave respondents a randomized list of potential parks and recreation projects that could be funded by the city and asked them to rate how high a priority each one was, also on a 1 to 7 scale. Here we're showing the total who said a 5 to 7, so the higher priority end of the scale. And then we have downtown respondents in blue on the top and the fall citywide voter survey in green. For most of the top items, the 2 surveys are quite similar, including restoring fish and wildlife habitat, providing more nature paths and trails, and building a community space for youth and teens. But there are 2 numbers where we see a bigger difference. First, on adding more open space, almost 60% of downtown residents said this was a priority compared to 45% of voters. This may have to do with the fact that the downtown survey has a much higher share of respondents who live in multi-unit buildings and may have limited or no private or shared outdoor space. And then next on the list, going in the opposite direction, adding waterfront access is a higher priority among voters, with 2/3 saying that's a priority compared to just under a half of downtown residents. On the lower tier priorities, we also see a lot of similar numbers between downtown residents and voters citywide, but there are a few items, outdoor sports courts, additional athletic fields, and a spray park down at the bottom, that are a bit lower priority among downtown residents than they are among voters. And some of that difference may be due to the fact that we had fewer respondents in the resident survey who report having a child in the household than we did in the voter survey. We asked a similar set of questions about potential amenities that could be added to downtown Kenmore on the same 1 to 7 priority scale. Again, here we're showing downtown residents in blue and voters citywide in green. The top tier priority, more restaurants and dining options, is quite similar between the 2 surveys, as are several others, but there are a few notable exceptions that are not surprisingly rated as more of a priority among downtown residents than voters across the city. This includes additional community gathering spaces, services like healthcare, legal and financial services, and additional grocery stores. Moving on, we had several questions around housing, and it's worth noting again here that part of the reason for doing this downtown resident survey in the first place is that we wanted to hear from more renters and individuals living in multifamily buildings, as we suspected there might be some differences in viewpoints as compared to owners of single-family homes, who we hear a lot from in voter surveys. And as you will see on the next few slides, that indeed turned out to be the case. First, we gave respondents some information about the case for missing middle housing in Kenmore. All respondents read a statement that some people say our neighborhoods should have a range of housing options and that we need more housing choices besides just single-family homes and apartments. This would give people who can't afford or don't need a full single-family home more options and create more attainable housing for more people at different points in their lives. Given this, do you support or oppose changing regulations to allow more duplexes and triplexes in Kenmore's neighborhoods? Back in the fall, when we asked this question of voters citywide, we saw majority support for changing regulations, with 59% in favor and about 40% opposed, with almost the same number strongly opposed as strongly supportive. Among downtown residents, we see even stronger support, 81% total, with about half strongly supportive and less than a quarter opposed. Next, we asked an open-ended question about what affordable housing means to you. Here we've selected a few example responses to give you an idea of the range we saw. As you can see, some focus more on rental prices, others more on the cost of homeownership, and others on the idea of having more housing in Kenmore that's affordable for a wider variety of people. We then gave respondents two choices for the role the city could play in affordable housing in Kenmore. The first, in green on the top, the city should be responsible only for planning for affordable housing projects in Kenmore as required by law. Or the second, in blue, the city should not just plan for affordable housing projects, it should take a more active role and use city tax dollars to subsidize the building of more affordable housing units in Kenmore. And on this slide, we have downtown residents in the darker shades on top, and voters citywide are the lighter bars. So first, comparing the two darker bars, that's the two choices among downtown residents, you can see that there's a pretty even split between these two positions, with about half choosing each one. Comparing that to voters citywide in the lighter bars, you can see there is a much clearer preference among voters towards the city taking a less active role and just doing what's required by law. We also wanted to take a look at this question just among downtown residents who don't report living in a detached single-family home. That's shown in the lighter bars here. We do want to take this with a grain of salt given the even smaller sample size of just 58, but we do see a bit of a preference towards the city subsidizing building more affordable housing among those not in single-family homes. Finally, we gave respondents a series of statements about affordable housing in Kenmore and asked them to rate how much they agreed with each one. This slide shows you the total percentage who agreed with each statement, with downtown residents again on the top in green and voters citywide in blue. Now, there's a lot on this one slide, but we wanted to show all of these items together so that you can see there is a clear pattern here, where for every statement we asked, we see more agreement among downtown residents than we do among voters. That said, for most of the statements on the top half of this slide, the difference isn't all that big. So that includes items like we need more housing that's affordable for teachers, first responders, and people working in the trades, and we need more housing that's affordable for working class families earning less than $100,000 a year. As we get further down the slide, though, there are some notable and bigger differences. So first, we need more housing in Kenmore that low-income and disadvantaged individuals and families can afford. We saw high agreement there among voters, with almost 2/3 saying they agree, but agreement is even stronger among downtown residents at 81%. Then moving down to we need more housing in Kenmore for families experiencing homelessness, we see a dramatic 25-point difference where half of voters agreed and 75% of downtown residents agreed. And then we see a similar, though not as drastic, pattern for the last three items. The city should work with housing developers to subsidize building more housing in Kenmore for individuals coming out of homelessness. We need more housing in Kenmore for individuals experiencing homelessness. And then finally, I'm concerned about being priced out of my own home. So looking at this pattern overall, we tend to see more heightened concern about individuals and families who are lower income or unhoused among downtown residents, as well as more concern about being able to afford staying in their own housing than we saw among voters, though obviously there's also very high agreement with most of these items among voters as well. Again, we wanted to look at this series of questions just among individuals not living in a single-family detached home. 73% of our downtown respondents. Those numbers are in the light blue here. A caveat, again, that this is a sample of only 58 people, and we also don't see huge differences compared to downtown residents overall, but we still wanted to show this is there is still a pattern of yet even a little bit stronger agreement across the board. And finally, this last slide shows the demographic breakdown of each of our recent surveys, including the percentage reporting having children in the household, homeowner-renter status, and type of housing down at the bottom.